Hey guys, Sintakan. Hola señores y señoritas. In today's video, I am going to show you guys how to build a technical documentation page, which is the fourth project in freeCodeCamp Responsive Web Design. My final version of the project looked like this. This video will have two phases. The first phase will show the minimal coding to complete the project, and then the second phase will show how I added additional touch-ups to make the project look more user-friendly and more visually appealing. To make the video as short and concise as possible, I'm going to skip the parts where I write the code, and I'm just going to highlight the sections and then briefly explain what it does and what it relates to. So with these projects, I like to do a full read-through of the instructions to give me a high-level overview of what I need to do, and then I can draft an outline or a layout of what I want the end product to look like. So my outline looked like this. One is an outline of how I want to structure the code elements, and then the second is how I want the design and layout to look like. Essentially, you want to begin with the end in mind. This means that you visualize the ending product that you desire, and then you work towards that vision. I explain more about this concept in my other video. I will provide the link in the video description below if you guys want to check it out. Since I love travel, for the theme of this project, I decided to create a technical documentation page on top 5 places in Southeast Asia I would recommend for you guys to check out. So let's go ahead and start our first story. So we'll start with 3 pages. First is our freeCodeCamp list of projects. So if we click on Build a Technical Documentation Page, it should open up the page with our instructions. And then our third tab is just a blank code pen where we'll be inputting our code. Let's first start by copying the FCC script so that we can run our tests. So when we open this page, we'll just Control-C this and then paste it onto our new blank code pen. So that gave us this function in the corner here. And then if we just click to technical documentation page and then leave it on there. So let's start with our first instruction. User story 1 here says, I can see a main element with a corresponding ID main doc which contains the page's main content. So let's create our main element and then add the ID main-doc. This is where we'll fill our content. Although it's not required, it's good etiquette to indicate the doc type as HTML here. So we have our main element here, and then in between we'll fill our content. Next, we can do user story 2, 3, 4 all together. Essentially, it wants us to create sections with a header that has an ID corresponding to the section ID as well. So if the ID in section is Japan, the header will also be Japan. So in between our main element, I've inputted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections, and then in each section I've added a header. So here ID Japan corresponds with header Japan, and then in section here ID Thailand corresponds to header Thailand, and then etc. And then we have our class attribute here for main-section. This we can format later in CSS. Next up, we can do user story 5, 6, and 7 together. Essentially, the project wants us in each of our main-sections to have 10 P elements, 5 code elements, and 5 listed items. So it just wants us to add text content for each of our sections. So since we have 5 sections and it wants us to do 10 P elements, I decided to add 2 paragraphs per section, and then it wants us to implement 5 code elements. So since we have 5 sections, I decided to add 1 code element per section, and then For listed items, I've kind of exceeded the requirement because I wanted to list out cities. So if we go back to our CodePen page, let's start with our Japan section. So although the code element is used to display code, I use it for an aesthetic function for this project. With the first P element, I will include the code element inside, and then I used a play on reference to the hello world, but instead we'll say hello to that correlating country. And then with the second P element here, I'll document popular cities that you can visit for each country. I'll put inside a UL element, which stands for unordered list. This creates a bulleted list. The LI element here stands for a listed item, and each of these will create a bulleted item. We can create a sub-bulleted list by putting a UL element within the original UL element that we created. And then again, the LI element between the UL element will create the bulleted items. Let's go ahead. And then BR down here essentially creates a vertical space. So let's go ahead and fill the other 4 sections. Next, we can do user story 8 to user story 13 in one go. The project essentially wants us to create a navigation bar with a header inside, and then below the header we'll have A elements, which are links that correlate to our ID tags that we created in our sections earlier, so that when we click on them, it will take us to that section on the page. So if we go back to our CodePen tab, and then right above the main element, I will input the navigation element right here, and then close it navigation at the bottom. And then within the navigation element, I will have our header element, and then our UL elements, and then between UL we'll have our LI elements, which is the listed items, which creates that bulleted item. And then within the LI element, I will have the A element, which will provide that linking ability. So with the class attribute within the A element, nav-link, this will give us the ability to format this link text later in CSS. And then href, these should equal to starting with quotation and then hashtag, and then the text that corresponds to the section ID. So here you can see Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, Taiwan, Singapore, and then I've also added a 6th section about me, just so I can add some info about myself at the bottom of the page. So hashtag Japan, this will, if we were to click on this, this would jump to our Japan section. So down here, so remember earlier in our section element we had ID Japan right here. So up here, this href reference, hashtag Japan. So if we click on the link, this will jump to that section. So next is user story 14. It wants us to add instruction in CSS so that our navigation bar always stays on the left side of the screen and is always visible to the user. So back onto our CodePen page, in our CSS column, we can start with hashtag navbar, and then in our instructions we can put top attribute to be 0 pixels. So from the top there's 0 spaces, and then our left attribute 0 pixels, so that from the left there's 0 spaces, so that our navigation bar will always stay on the left top corner. So we started with hashtag because in our HTML our nav ID is navbar, so ID goes with So to format anything that has ID, you start with hashtag, and then to format anything with class, you start with period. I remember this because usually if you work in an office, on your card to scan into the door, usually for your employee ID number, there would be a hashtag before it, and then for class and then period, it's just the mnemonic is pretty straightforward. Like back in high school, you would have class period. So our other attributes, position fix will mean that the navigation bar will always stay in the same place even if the page is scrolled up or down. And I kind of want that. I want the navigation bar to always be visible to these users so they can easily navigate wherever they are on the page. The height is 100%, which just means that it will populate the entire height of that page, so like from top to bottom. And then the minimum width is always at least 300 pixels. Width normally 300 pixels, and then our color font will be black, and then the background color is white, so this will give it a nice contrast. And then padding is just the spacing between the content and the border. So next is user story 15. It wants us to add an add media query element into our CSS, commonly used to instruct if the viewport is displayed on something else, like an iPhone or an iPad. So if we go back to our CodePen page, and then in the CSS column, I will add in that add media query. So in the first line, I've put max-width of 800px. So this means that when the browser window is 800px wide or less, the instructions that we write below this add media query will apply. 800px is a good amount because our navigation bar already takes up 300px, so the remainder screen that can be seen is 500px, which is already quite smoosh. So 800px I felt like is a nice benchmark to implement our add media query. I'm going to apply instructions for 4 key areas to show when the viewport is 800 pixels or less. First is hashtag VD logo, second is hashtag nav bar, third is period header text, and then fourth is hashtag main doc. So we can see that for hashtag VD logo and hashtag nav bar and period header text, I put position as absolute so that we will lock and fix those elements to its specified instructions for top and left. So it will stay put when we scroll down or up on the page. While for our main hashtag main doc, I've applied position colon as relative. Therefore, this main content will flow and appear relative to the above element. Up here, the dash star here allows for you to write comments to make it easier for yourself or a user to read comments about the code. This will not affect the appearance of the page if the text is between dash star and star dash. So we wrote here for mobile phones, which just makes it easier as a hint for us when we look at it. And then for VD logo and for header text, I put z index a value of 2 because I want them to show above everything else. Assuming the other elements are at a default value of 0, the value of positive 2 will make sure that this element appears in front of everything else that has a lower value. So for our navigation bar here, I put a z index of 1, which will show behind the VD logo, but above everything else, assuming that the other elements are at a default value of 0. At this point in time, we should have satisfied all 15 of the requirements. So let's go to our script and then just test it out. So as you can see, all the tests have been completed. So we're going to move on to our second phase of the video where I show you the additional touch-ups that I've added to the project to make it more visually aesthetic. I'm going to go back to my HTML column, and then under HTML, I'm going to add 2 IMG elements wrapped within a division element. So my first image is a header image, which appears at the very top. And then my second image will appear in the body content. So you guys can see it right here. So I've wrapped the IMG elements with, so the IMG elements are here. So this is the first one. Here's the second one. And as you can see, they all are in between a div element. So the reason why I wrapped it with a div element is to give it a frame, which gives more flexibility on formatting the image later. I've added a specific ID for each of the division elements, and also a class attribute within the IMG elements so that we can format these later in CSS. ID is often used for one element that you want to format like one time, and in CSS you would reference these starting with a hashtag, while for the class attribute, these may be a series that you want to apply a similar formatting for several elements, and in CSS you can reference these starting with a period. I also want to add a title and an empowering quote in front of the header image. So right under the IMG element that I just added, I'm going to add in 2 more div elements, and then within the div elements I'll have a header 1 element and a header 2 element. Now I'm going to scroll to the About Me section, which I did not add any content for earlier. So I'm going to add here 2 IMG elements, 2 pictures, and then I'm going to wrap those pictures with an A element so that when you click on the picture, it will direct you to a new page. So our first A element is here, and then the second A element is here, and then within each A element there's a unique unique picture, a unique IMG source link. For the A element, I've added an ID attribute so that I can format these later in CSS. The attribute target here equals to quotation underscore blank quotation will open a new window when you click on the link, and then the href attribute here equals to quotation. This is where you will input the link that you want the user, when they click for that page, to open to. And then within the A element, I have the IMG element. So then src is source equals to quotation. This is the link to the picture that you want to use, and then all is equals to quotation, and then this is the text that you want to show in case if the image doesn't work. This is helpful to remind you what image should be there in case if you need to re-upload or re-link the image. And then I added in the class attribute here so that we can format this picture later in CSS. We're done with HTML, so I'm just going to change the view and then just show you what code I'm going to add in for CSS. So I'll only keep my CSS window open and the preview of the page on the left. So going back to our CSS column, I'm going to add in add import and a body media query. So the add import URL up here will provide reference to the Google font that I want to use. The body media query below will provide instructions in general of how the page will look like, without the exceptions of specific elements that we will reference to ID or class later below. So first is font family, which is the font type. Color is the font color. background dash color, I put it as black. Line dash height is the spacing between the text in a vertical perspective. With 100% means it will apply 100% across the body. So next up, I'm going to add formatting to our background images that we added earlier. So I've added in hashtag background, period background stretch, hashtag background right, and then period background right stretch. And these, so let's start with the first one. Hashtag background refers, if I just open my HTML, it refers to our div ID background here. And then period background underscore stretch refers to our IMG element within the div here. And then hashtag background right refers to our div ID equals to background right here. And then period background underscore right underscore stretch refers to the IMG element within that div element. So these background references refer to our header image and our main content background image that we added in HTML. So if you use class attribute as an anchor in CSS, you will start with a period. And then if you start with an ID attribute as an anchor in CSS, you will start with a hashtag. For both images, I've added a Z index with a negative value of 1 to make sure that the image appears behind the other elements, assuming everything is at a default value of 0. I've also added opacity of 0.75 for both images so that it creates a dim look. Since our background color is black, this will bring out our text and make the image more subtle. So the dim look of the background image and the white and gray text will appear more bold to the user. So next, I'm going to apply formatting for our header text. So for our period header underscore text here, I've applied an attribute display :grid. So this makes it so that it's like a box with 2 columns. One column will have the title, which is down here, header title, and then the second column will have the quote, which is down here, period header underscore quote. I applied this grid attribute so that it will place those 2 items in a grid-like template so that they will align and move as one unit, but appears as 2 different areas. So in the grid dash template dash columns, I put 1FR comma 1FR. This means that it's 1 fraction, so each column takes up an equal width. Grid dash gap is how much space is between the 2 columns. Again, I've applied the Z dash index attribute to make sure that the grid appears above the other elements, assuming they are at a default value of 0. So +2 is higher than 0. I think we might have an error, so let's just scroll up to check. So for body, I forgot to close it with a bracket. Okay. So next, we're going to apply formatting to our navigation bar items. So under hashtag navbar, I'm going to format the elements within the navbar. So I've added hashtag navbar header, hashtag navbar li, hashtag navbar a, and hashtag navbar a : hover. So for our navbar, we can actually format the elements within our navbar in CSS simply by adding on the element type behind the parent hashtag navbar. So we had a header element the li element, and a colon hover for the linking. So A is when the link appears on its own, so this will be gray. And then for A colon hover, this is if your mouse cursor is over it, what you want it to look like. Here I instructed the color to be black, and to show an underline to give it a contrast or activate effect. So if we hover our mouse, we can see that wherever the pointer is over, it will highlight black and have an underline. Next, I'm going to format our main sections. So I'm going to add in hashtag main-doc here, and then a query for section here. For our sections, I added a very light cyan background color using this RGB code. 230, 255, 255, and then an opacity of 0.1 just to make it very subtle. For my padding attribute, I put 2.5 rem and then 2.5 rem. So the first unit is top and bottom, and then the second unit is left and right. So this is how much space you want between the edge and the content. And then border dash radius is to round out our corners to make it look more friendly. This will give a nice layover in the back for our sections to pop. Next, I want to format our section headers. So using a similar logic as our navigation bar, where we formatted elements within the navigation bar, we can add in section header. So all headers within the section element. So our section is the parent, and then if we want to format any elements within the parent, we can put a corresponding element behind the query. So here, to make the headers more bold and distinct, I've used text-transform : uppercase to transform and make all the letters all caps. And then font-weight to make the letters bold, and then font-size to make it bigger, and then letter-spacing to add spacing between the letters to make it look more wider and a more cinematic kind of look. The last thing I want to format is our YouTube pictures down here. So right now it's a bit too sharp. To make it blend in and more smoother, I'm going to add in period YouTube end, which refers to our class attribute that we used as an anchor for these images earlier. So if I just expand HTML, I'll show you guys. Where is it? IMG. So here, class YouTube _ end in our first IMG, and then in our second IMG as well, the same class YouTube _ end. So as I was saying earlier, class is, you can use it as an anchor for similar series that you want to apply formatting to. So then let's go back to CSS. So here you can see period YouTube _ end. I've applied border radius to round out our corners to make it less sharp and less harsh, and then an opacity of 0.8 just to make it look more smooth with everything else. So I'm going to hit save and then change the view to full page. This essentially should complete the project. So the end product will again look like this, and then I'm just going to double check and run the test again on technical documentation page. So yeah, everything passes. This brings me to the end of the video. If you guys found this video helpful, I would really appreciate if you guys could give it a like, a comment, and if you'd like to see more content, feel free to subscribe to this channel. I will provide the link reference to this project in the video description below. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video.